Hello everybody, this is Aki the Great, and today we're going to be talking about deck building fundamentals. So deck building can be quite a difficult concept to learn in Legends of Runeterra because it requires experimenting with deck concepts and identifying their shortcomings while you are playing or losing a game. And that's quite difficult to do, and even more difficult is once you've identified the shortcomings, knowing exactly which cards to cut, which cards to add. But hopefully from this video you'll gain sort of an understanding of at least my process for seeing the realization of a deck from start to finish. Before we start, if you're interested in coaching, please check the link in the description. There will be a link to my coaching service. And so if you want help building a deck, refining a deck, or even just, help climbing through ladder, I would be happy to help you out. So let's get into it. I've got a few decks that I've been experimenting with, a few decks that are existing concepts that I have refined. But we will use this deck, Tempo Ender, as a template. So this is the deck that I hit Masters with last season, and the concept is definitely not one that I've come up with, but this deck I did a little bit of refining on, just to make sure that I was able to, have all the tools that I needed to climb as far as I ended up going. So I'm going to use this kind of as a way to give examples of the deck building steps that I am going to outline for you today. So I've got a bit of a notepad document, and I will start with the first step, which is identify your win conditions. So win conditions can look like a lot of different things. You have maybe out-tempo your opponent. If you have a lot of minions, if you're able to develop them really fast and attack with them, quickly, before your opponent's strategies can get online, before your opponent can defend themselves, then, of course, that will represent a way to beat your opponent. Another way to win is through the use of burn spells. So, of course, burn spells are ways of dealing direct damage to your opponent's nexus, whether through spells or through skills. So maybe I should say, or skills. So, your minions might have special skills that allow them to deal direct damage to the opponent's nexus. A good example of this is Imperial Demolitionist, which deals 1 damage to an ally and 2 to the enemy nexus. But, of course, the standard way of thinking about burn is something like Decimate, that just deals flat damage to the opponent's nexus. This can be a way to finish off your opponent when you've dealt some good damage early game, or just to have burn spells can just be used as a flexible option when slotted into your deck. Something like Noxian Fervor is a good example of a flexible burn spell, which can be used on the opponent's nexus to finish them off, but it has a lot of different purposes, as it can also be used as removal. So another possible win condition would be something like a late game combo. So, there are a lot of different late game combos. There are some funny ones, like there's a card called Dreadway, which doubles all damage dealt by your skills, spells, and allies. And there's a card called Commander Ledros, which can deal damage to the enemy equal to half of its Nexus health. So, of course, Dreadway plus Ledros will deal the full 20 damage, or however much health your opponent's Nexus has, to their face. This deck, the deck that I have showcased right here, actually has a combo itself. They Who Endure plus Atrocity is a great example of that combo. And then you have some other weird win conditions, something like maybe Fiora or Maokai, Mill, something along those lines. And those are pretty self-explanatory as well. So, you know, this is of course a non-exhaustive list. There are more types of win conditions, and honestly, I could probably go into more depth about each of these, but you know, the main thing to remember is that if your deck does not have a win condition, you will find that, or at least if you don't know your deck's win condition, you won't know how to actually close out a game. And this is the important thing to remember. Your deck should have generally more than one win condition. And so I think Tempo Endure is a beautiful example of a deck that has a lot of different ways to win the game. And this means that it it may be a little bit difficult to know which win condition to shoot for in every given circumstance, but it also means that this deck will stay more relevant, because if your deck has more ways to win the game, it will be able to stand up to the meta a lot better. So this is your first step, and it's generally the easiest step. So let's identify the win conditions of Tempo Endure. We'll start with the kind of easy one, the late game combo. So the way the late game combo works is you make sure that your tokens die, and these tokens could be like Elise, who can create spiders. It can be Blighted Caretaker, who kills an ally and summons 2 ephemeral saplings. This can be Callista, who generates, upon her level up, an ephemeral version of the strongest dead ally. And then your They Who Endure becomes very big and very strong, and then you place the They Who Endure down, try to attack with it, and if your opponent tries to remove it, then you can use Atrocity to finish off their Nexus with a huge burst of damage. So this is the Tempo Endure's primary win condition. And so with your deck, you want to be identifying not just what your win conditions are, but what your primary win conditions are, and what your kind of secondary or tertiary win conditions are. So the primary win condition of this deck would be the late game combo. But what are the other win conditions of the deck? Well, as I said earlier, if you out-tempo your opponent, you will often find that you are just in a position to win the game. And this deck can do that very easily with, something like a Bark Beast on 1, and then a Cursed Keeper or Ravenous Butcher on 2. Another possible line is Bark Beast on 1, Cursed Keeper on 2, and then Blighted Caretaker on 3. Those lines just create so many bodies that it becomes very, very difficult for your opponent to actually get through the sheer number of units and even the health of those units is very very substantial for that point of the game. So one win condition is out-tempoing your opponent. This deck has the capability to do so, and can win some games against some late game decks by doing that. And then the last win condition of this deck would be Neverglade Collector. Neverglade Collector I would put in the category of burn spells or skills, because it's sort of Neverglade Collector's quote-unquote skill. It's not like a technical skill, But when an ally dies, it drains 1 from the enemy nexus. This can be an amazing tool against aggro or against against decks that have a lot of board clears. So just keeping that in mind is important as you refine or create a deck. The next step I would offer is know why you are putting certain cards in your deck. So what does this mean? It's a little bit of an abstract step, but it's important to know that every single card in your deck is going to be played, and knowing the role of each card in your deck will help you understand, just the mechanics of your deck, and it will also help you identify what parts of your deck are unnecessary, and which ones are holding you back and maybe even contributing to some anti-synergy. So, as I go through the deck, I see Bark Beast. Bark Beast is super important for tempo. He's an amazing drop on 1 and can be used with Cursed Keeper combos in the early game to create some devastating early game plays. Omen Hawk is wonderful for adding some extra stats to later minions while also being just a small, small chump blocker that allows you to just gain those extra stats on They Who Endure. Avaros and Sentry is vital card draw for the deck, and can also be revived with Callista for some extra value. Cursed Keeper is vital with Cursed Keeper combos, such as Blighted Caretaker and Ravenous Butcher. Vile Feast not only serves as important removal, but also can be used to contribute to the Elise level up condition. Every single card, I could give you a reason why it's included in the deck. But the reason that, of course you want to be doing that anyway every time you put a card in, of course you're going to have a reason for it. But the reason why I identify this here is because knowing why you're putting certain cards in your deck is important also for knowing how many copies of each card should be in the deck. So this is often a very difficult thing to get down to kind of a science. So this is my general guide. So 3 copies. 2 copies. And then 1 copy. So why would you want to put 3 copies in your deck? So let's look at the cards in this deck that have 3 copies. Neverglade Collector, They Who Endure, Callista, Blighted Caretaker, Vile Feast, Glimpse Beyond. Cursed Keeper. So all these cards that I have 3 copies of in this deck, they all contribute directly to my win conditions. So I have 3 They Who Endures because it's vital that I get stats on They Who Endure. I have 3 Callistas because Callista represents important tempo and can generate ephemeral units to support my other win conditions. I have 3 Glimpse Beyonds because I'm going to need fuel if I'm going to be doing any of this. So essentially, you want 3 copies of a card in your deck if they are, 3 copies of cards which are pivotal to achieving one of your win conditions. So which cards do we want 2 copies of? Well, we want 2 copies of Fury of the North, and 2 copies of Atrocity. So what does that mean for the general rule for adding 2 copies of a card into your deck? Well, Atrocity and Fury of the North both support my other win conditions, but don't necessarily, in themselves, uh, allow me to win the game on their own. So if I were to draw, for example, 2 Atrocities in my hand, I would find that on their own they don't actually really do much. But they're important for the They Who Endure combo. They can also be used if I'm going the tempo route to finish off the game. So it is an important card, but on its own, it doesn't achieve the win condition. So I have 2 copies of cards which support but do not constitute alone my win condition. And which cards do I have 1 copy of? So you can see I have Ravenous Butcher, Hapless Aristocrat, Haunted Relic. Those are the cards I have 1 copy of in my deck. So 1 copy, you should be having 1 copy of cards that are either tech cards or situational cards. So we can go through each of those. Ravenous Butcher is really, really good with Cursed Keeper, but in almost any other hand, meaning any hand that doesn't have Cursed Keeper in it, Ravenous Butcher is not a good resource. It's a 0-cost card, which is great, but it doesn't provide that much tempo. It's a 3/2 card, and it requires you to kill an ally to play it. Hapless Aristocrat is a generally great card, and can support the Elise kind of pseudo win condition, but the issue is that in metas where blockers are not as important, Hapless Aristocrat will not get that much value, and as a result, Hapless Aristocrat becomes situational. I think we're starting to get back into a meta where blockers are a little important, but the meta that I used this deck in was very elusive heavy and overwhelm heavy. So Hapless Aristocrat did not really work for me. Then Haunted Relic is the other one of in this deck, and Haunted Relic is a wonderful card if used with Neverglade Collector to do some extra burn to the face, or with Callista to level her up immediately. But the issue is that those are the only 2 circumstances in which this card finds that much value. And as a result of that, it ends up being a bit of a dead draw unless you have those 2 cards. So all of those cards are end up being situational cards. This deck doesn't have too many tech cards, as it were, because it's pretty formidable on its own. But if this deck were to run something like Deny, it would probably only do 1 of that. But of course, we are not in those regions. We are in Freljord Shadow Isles. So that is the main way that we deal with figuring out how many copies of a card to include. And here is the last thing, and I touched on this a little bit. Figure out your deck's position in the meta. So, your deck is going to need to have some kind of place in the meta to, either counter an existing concept or, play at a certain speed that other decks are not playing at. Um, if you go out into the ranked ladder without kind of a plan, you will find that the decks that represent existing archetypes will just kind of run you over. So, how do you figure out your deck's position in the meta? Well, it all has to do with your win condition. So, our win condition is, applying constant pressure until we can either finish the game off with Neverglade Collector, capitalizing on the tempo that we've established earlier, or using the They Who Endure Atrocity combo to finish them off late game. This deck has 3 win conditions, so playing against something maybe like a deep deck, we would want to get lots of early game tempo and maybe try to finish the game off with Neverglade Collector because, deep decks have a lot of hard removal and they might be able to deal with our They Who Endure if we drop it down later. Another matchup might be something like Misfortune Scouts, which is a very popular deck this season. That would require us to, because that deck is faster than our deck, we would want to play for the later game. And the They Who Endure Atrocity combo should not have any problems going off because the only removal cards that deck runs are things like Single Combat, which would not be able to deal with They Who Endure. But the issue is that because the deck is so fast, we need a way to stay alive, which would require that we, develop our tokens and block things out as efficiently as we can. So, figuring out your deck's position in the meta is a matter of understanding what decks are out there, and understanding against which decks to play for certain win conditions. So, as I said, against some faster decks, you may want to think about your later game combos. Against some slower decks, you may want to think about out-tempoing your opponent. So, this is just the general set of things that I do every time I'm making or refining a deck. Even though this deck is one that I made from scratch, the deck that I hit masters with my first season, I did make from scratch. It's this deck right here. Actually, I incorporated this new card here, but the old version of the deck did not have it. So I encourage you to try to experiment because, a lot of people will be playing a lot of the existing things, and if you have your own style, if you have your own, deck concept that you're trying out in the meta, you'll find that people will be less prepared to deal with you, which is a very cool feeling. Again, if you think that you may want some help in the ranked ladder, or if you have a deck yourself, you want help refining, or just want some help deck building in general, please click the link in the description to check out my coaching service, and I will see you next week.